Chapter 851. The remaining 3 people were stunned. What do you mean? I'll just stand guard outside. Chang Wanzhou glanced at Qin Yi and Lei Laosi as he spoke with pursed lips. Chu Luiyue smiled but was very insistent. It's okay. Even if Qin Yi is in the room, he can still monitor the entire courtyard. Qin Yi raised his brows. Chang Wanzhou hesitated for a moment before finally following him in. Lei Laosi glanced at Chang Wanzhou then at Chu Luiyue. In the end, he couldn't help but look at his eldest brother for help. Is Her Highness not planning to avoid this fellow? Qin Yi, sorry to trouble you, said Chu Luiyue. Qin Yi raised his hand, and a wooden cicada appeared in his palm. The wooden cicada's workmanship was extremely exquisite and lifelike. He raised his wrist, and the wooden cicada flew out. If there's any movement within a radius of 2.5 kilometers, it will immediately discover it, explained Qin. Then he set up a green barrier in the room, isolating their voices from the outside world. Chu Luiyue smiled. I've always been assured when you do things. Qin Yi's expression became serious, and a faint smile appeared on his picturesque face. This made his originally apathetic expression suddenly become lively. Then he bowed respectfully toward Chu Luiyue. Qin Yi will naturally do my best for Your Highness. Chang Wanzhou, who had just walked to Chu Luiyue's side, narrowed his eyes. Your Highness, how many people in the world can use this form of address? Furthermore, this came from a top elite like Qin Yi. Chu Luiyue actually had mixed feelings when he heard this form of address again. Nan Yiling Si, it's been hard on you these 2 years. Qin Yi's expression changed slightly. Lei Laosi's eyes actually turned red for a moment. If Your Highness can return safely, we won't have to suffer. We'll follow Your Highness until death. With Your Highness's words, these 2 years of bitter waiting and suffering weren't in vain. Chang Wanzhou looked down. As expected, their names and identities were all different. And to be able to make such an expert follow him to the death, Chu Luiyue's identity was obviously not ordinary. She's definitely not just a lady from a small country Yaochen. Chang Wanzhou vaguely felt that a curtain was slowly opening in front of him. Once that curtain was opened, it would definitely cause everyone to be extremely shocked. This was only the tip of the iceberg. Qin Yi, Your Highness, we've all changed our identities. For safety's sake, please call us by our current names. Chu Luiyue thought for a moment, then nodded and sighed. If I hadn't trusted the scoundrel so easily back then, I wouldn't have ended up like this today. You guys wouldn't even be able to use your original names, and the 13 you guards were all great. Any one of them would be an elite among elites. They were willing to follow her. She didn't know how much they had suffered, but they were still loyal to her. But in the end, they only had the bad reputation of betraying their master. They could only run away and wander around, suffering between life and death day and night. Even now, they had to change their identities when they returned to Xiling. They couldn't even use their real names. Your Highness, you don't have to blame yourself. You've been extremely benevolent to them. They only did this because they were too greedy and despicable. If you want to talk about hatred, you should hate those people who betrayed you back then. Big Brother is right. Your Highness, how did you treat them back then? In the end, once Lei Laosi thought about what happened back then, he became agitated. Even though 2 years had already passed, the scene back then was still as clear as yesterday. These people should be hacked into pieces. At this moment, Qin Yi suddenly looked outside and smiled. Someone's here. A figure silently appeared outside the door. It was Qi Han. Big Brother, it's indeed you guys. Qi Han heaved a sigh of relief when he saw the few people in the room. When he was outside just now, he vaguely felt that it was Big Brother's doing. Now that he came in to take a look, it was indeed so. Chu Luiyue curved her eyes. Qi Han, you even brought someone here? As she spoke, she looked behind Qi Han. A figure suddenly jumped out. Your Highness, can't you pretend that you didn't see me? That was a young man who looked no more than 12 or 13 years old. His face still had some childishness, but he also vaguely had the aura of a young man. His pair of round eyes were very lively, and when he smiled, his eyes curved into crescents. Chu Luiyue was a little shocked. "Little 13, you've actually grown so tall already? I remember that I was still a little boy before." Little 13 wrinkled his nose. "You haven't seen me for 2 years, so I naturally grew up quite a bit." Children at this age always hoped that they would grow up quickly and even liked to pretend to be very mature. However, between his words and actions, there was always a hint of childishness, which made people not know whether to laugh or cry. Speaking of this, he quickened his pace and stopped in front of Chu Luiyue before he asked curiously, "But Your Highness, why do you look different from before?" Based on the aura, it was indeed Her Highness. "But this appearance, 13. Chi Han called out to him in warning. 13 immediately shuddered and covered his mouth. "Oh no." Previously, seventh brother said that after he came, he must not speak carelessly. However, he was too happy to see Her Highness and forgot for a moment. "Chi Han, why are you shouting at him?" Chu Luiyue glanced at Chi Han and waved at 13. 13, don't be afraid." 13 hurriedly ran over and hid beside Chu Luiyue. He stuck his tongue out at Chi Han, proud and happy. Chi Han restrained his expression and cupped his fists. "Your Highness, please forgive me. I didn't tell 13 much about what happened before." In fact, they didn't even tell 13 about Her Highness's death. They only told him that Her Highness was harmed by someone, but she had her own plans and would return in the future. Therefore, while everyone was waiting in torment, only 13 was kept in the dark. He cultivated peacefully while waiting for her return. Chu Luiyue nodded. This was actually the best. 13 was the youngest, so all of them had always treated him like a child. Some things were indeed better kept from him. That's not important. 13, you seem to have improved a lot in the past 2 years. Your ability to hide is almost as good as your seventh brother's, right? Chu Luiyue was really surprised about this. 13 was very talented in this aspect. Otherwise, he wouldn't have brought him along. However, the speed of his improvement still exceeded everyone's expectations. When 13 heard this, he immediately said proudly, "Of course. You don't know, but recently, I've been secretly tracking Jiang Yuqing's whereabouts." Chu Luiyue asked with great interest. "Then what did you find out?" Digression, mobile users at 6 o'clock, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 852. Back in the room, 13 recounted everything he had found out about the recent investigation. Chi Han added a few sentences from time to time. Chu Luiyue then realized that the 4 people in front of her weren't the only ones from the 13U Guard who returned to Xiling. More importantly, Chi Han and the rest actually worked together with Jian Fengqi and Shui Lu. Previously, when she sent Mu Hongyu back to Dragon Teeth Mountain, she didn't meet Jian Fengqi, so she didn't know about this. As she listened, Chu Luiyue then realized that Xiling had already set up a giant net. Other than the many preparations I made, the various parties had also made preparations in the open and in the dark. After a long time, Chu Luiyue finished listening to their arrangements and let out a long sigh as she lamented in her heart. At this moment, she finally understood that she wasn't fighting alone from the beginning to the end. In the 2 years after she died, there were always people running around for her. Unknowingly, there seemed to be someone helping her plan everything. Unknowingly, there was an invisible hand controlling everything for her and gathering all of her remaining strength. Just for today. Who exactly is this person? Your Highness, what do you plan to do next? Qi Ni asked gently. Based on the evidence they currently had, they could basically reconstruct the truth from back then. But other than that, the most important thing was Chu Luiyue's identity. They could clear Her Highness's name, but it would be difficult for Her Highness to regain her position again. After all, she had already changed her physical body, so it wouldn't be easy for her to gain everyone's recognition. Back then, the news of the princess's death spread like wildfire. Even if an identical face appeared, everyone might not believe it. Besides, I'm indeed Chu Luiyue now. If I don't have enough evidence to prove that I stole someone's body, it would be hard for people to believe me. At this moment, a commotion suddenly came from outside. Everyone in the room was extremely sensitive, and they all looked over. Who would come here at this time? Qin Yi narrowed his eyes. It seems to be someone from the palace. Chu Liuyue's red lips curved slightly. They sure came quickly. She stood up and raised her chin. Yes, this is my plan. They looked at each other. Does His Highness intend to fight them head-on? You guys stay put for now. I'm going to meet Shangguan. Today, I'll send her some dishes. Tomorrow I'll prepare a big gift. Yes. When Qin Yi and the others heard that, they immediately hid themselves. Soon, only Chu Luiyue and Chang Wanzhou were left in the room. Chu Luiyue lifted his foot and walked outside. However, as soon as he took a step forward, he was stopped by Chang Wanzhou. Wait. Chu Luiyue turned around. Chang Wanzhou looked at her with a complicated gaze. There seemed to be countless emotions surging in his eyes. Today's shock was so great that even he couldn't digest it all in a short time. You are the Empress' concubine? He said the last two words very softly. Even though he grew up in Nanjiang, he had heard of the legendary princess of the Tianling dynasty. Everyone said that she had died 2 years ago due to qi deviation while practicing martial arts. However, all the things that happened so far all showed that Chu Liuyue was her. As ridiculous as it may sound, it's true that. Don't you already know the answer? Chu Liuyue continued to smile as if she didn't care about this matter. Chang Wanzhou was stunned. Kiki, aren't you afraid that I'll leak it? Once someone finds out about such a shocking secret, it'll definitely be like thunder exploding, and the entire Tianling dynasty will fall into chaos. However, she actually told him without hiding anything. Chu Liuyue asked in return. Would you do that? Of course not. Chang Wanzhou replied almost instinctively. Chu Liuyue was extremely important to him. He once secretly swore in his heart that if he couldn't find that person, he would follow Chu Liuyue for the rest of his life. For her, he would go through fire and water without fear of death. Chu Liuyue chuckled. Then it's fine. She answered so matter-of-factly that Chang Wanzhou didn't know what to do for a moment. He understood that Chu Liuyue intended to tell him her identity today. I believe you. Chu Liuyue suddenly said softly. She once thought that after experiencing such a bitter betrayal, she would no longer be able to trust others the same way. However, that wasn't the case. Some people did choose to betray her, but at the same time, there was another group of people who chose to pledge their loyalty to her. She had lost everything, but she still had such a group of people who had always been with her and waiting for her. Chang Wanzhou had followed her for so long that he must have noticed that she was different from ordinary people in many ways. However, since she didn't say anything, he didn't ask and just followed her silently. Whether in life or death, he would always be by her side. Chang Wanzhou looked into those clear eyes, and something seemed to surge in his chest. The blood in his body seemed to be flowing quickly, almost boiling. Let's go. A good show is about to begin. Chu Liuyue blinked, then turned and walked forward. Chang Wanzhou clenched his fists and quickly followed. Chu Liuyue opened the door and saw a familiar face. Chani. At this moment, her forehead was covered in sweat, and her hair was a little messy. She looked like she had been running around for a long time. Chu Liuyue was surprised. Miss Chani, why are you here? Chani looked at Chu Liuyue in front of her, inwardly annoyed. However, Chani was someone who had seen the world, so her expression was still calm. She bowed, and her voice was slightly cold. Miss Chu, you've made this servant look for you. After receiving the third princess's order, she personally came out to invite her. She first went to the Chongshu Pavilion, but the people at the Chongshu Pavilion said that she wasn't on the mountain. She then hurriedly found her way here. Chu Liuyue didn't seem to hear the dissatisfaction and complaint in her voice. Miss Chani, why are you looking for me? And you seem to be in a hurry? Chani suppressed the anger in her heart and said, the third princess was very happy to hear that Miss Chu had returned safely, so she specially sent this servant to invite you to the palace. Chu Liuyue wasn't the only one who had returned safely. Even a fool could guess why she had been invited alone. Chu Liuyue nodded in understanding. So it's the third princess's order. I'm really sorry to trouble Miss Chani to come so far. I happen to be free, so let's go now. It's not good to make the third princess wait. Chani was stunned. She originally thought that Chu Luiyue would refuse, but she didn't expect Chu Luiyue to directly agree. However, this also saved her a lot of trouble, so she didn't think too much about it. Miss Chu, please. Chu Luiyue nodded and turned to Chang Wanzhou. I'll be back soon. Chang Wanzhou nodded. Chu Luiyue followed Chani with a smile. Then let's go. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 853. Chu Luiyue followed Chani into the palace. In Huayang Palace, Shangguan Wan was already impatient from waiting. She paced back and forth impatiently. The words she heard just now kept echoing in her ears. She originally thought that Chu Luiyue was completely dead. She didn't expect him to come back alive. Moreover, he even made a contract with a mythical beast and even obtained the dancing lotus. It was fine if Chu Luiyue was lucky enough to stumble upon the legendary fiend's matter by chance. But what was the deal with the dancing lotus? She still clearly remembered that when Elder Qiushi tried to obtain the dancing lotus, he was directly swallowed into the mirror lake. He didn't even have the chance to struggle and scream before he completely disappeared. Later on, Jian Shai and the others also returned empty-handed. How did Chu Luiyue do it? The more Shangguan Yu thought about it, the more annoyed she became. This feeling of being easily beaten by others was too familiar. In the past, when Shangguan Yu was still alive, he always suppressed her like this. No matter how hard she tried, how attentive, and how she tried to please him, no one would spare her a second glance. In their eyes and hearts, there was only Shangguan Yu. Shangguan Wan thought about what happened back then and gritted her teeth in hatred. One Shangguan Yu was enough. Now, there was actually another Chu Luiyue. She raised her hand and touched her face. As long as she finished what she had to do, there was no need to keep Chu Luiyue. Because the next day was the day of the wedding, the palace was already decorated. Along the way, there were lanterns and colored banners, and it was very lively. As Chu Luiyue walked in, she nonchalantly sized up the place. She could tell that Shangguan Wan was probably carrying out the ceremony according to the princess etiquette. Naturally, it couldn't be compared to her wedding back then. Although Shangguan Wan was bold, she didn't dare to step on her head so openly. However, these things for the wedding seemed to be newly made. She guessed that Shangguan Wan wouldn't be willing to use what she had left behind. However, Shangguan Wan definitely felt aggrieved that she had lost in this scale. Chu Luiyue's lips curled up. Soon, the two of them arrived at Huayang Palace. Chani went forward and knocked on the door. Shangguan Wan's voice quickly came from inside. Then, Chani walked out and invited Chu Luiyue in. With a smile on her face, Chu Luiyue agreed and walked in. Inside the room, Shangguan Wan was waiting. The moment she saw Chu Luiyue's and saw Chu Luiyue's eyes. When she saw that familiar face's face, S's frowned subconsciously. And see, S's, us palace, third princess, how have you been? Chu Luiyue stopped 5 steps away from Shangguan Wan and said with a smile. She didn't bow, nor was there any trace of humility on her face. It was as if she didn't place Shangguan Wan in her eyes at all. This made Shangguan Wan even more furious. She couldn't help but sneer. What? You've forgotten your etiquette after coming back from the great desolate swamp? Why aren't you bowing when you see this princess? Chu Luiyue raised her brows slightly as if she had heard a joke. She laughed lightly. She said with a chuckle, Third princess, have you ever seen anyone in this world bow respectfully when they see someone who almost killed them? I still remember all the things you did to me in the mystic forest. Shangguan Wan choked. The situation back then was extremely dangerous. She was indeed partly responsible for Chu Luiyue's fall. There was no way she could deny this no matter what. Shangguan Wan's face turned cold. What? Are you here to settle accounts with this princess today? That's strange. Didn't you invite me here, third princess? Chu Luiyue walked to a nearby chair very naturally and sat down leisurely. She rested her chin on one hand and said, Even if I'm looking for trouble, shouldn't you be the one looking for me? Seeing Chu Luiyue's impudence, Shangguan Wan's face turned red with anger. How dare you? This is Huayang Palace. How dare you act so presumptuously? Chu Luiwei raised her eyes and looked at her coldly. She sneered in her heart. Speaking of which, Shangguan Wan was only able to find a place to stay in Huayang Palace because of her help and pleading with Imperial Father. Now, did she think that she was the rightful owner of this place? Ridiculous. You know very well why the third princess has asked me to come here. Could it be that third princess wants me to be deeply grateful to you at this very moment? If third princess doesn't like me, you can call people in right now and take me away for punishment. Wouldn't that be enough? Chu Luiwei spoke very impolitely. She didn't put Shangguan Wan in her eyes at all. Shangguan Wan angrily pointed at Chu Luiwei. Her face was green and white. You dare to threaten this princess. In the past 2 years, almost no one had dared to speak to her in such a tone. Chu Luiwei leaned lazily on the chair and looked at Shangguan Wan with half-narrowed eyes. There was a hint of ridicule in her dark jade-like eyes. So what? So what? She had made up her mind that Shangguan Wan definitely wouldn't dare to call people in at this time. Unless she wanted to make a big scene and lose face on the day before the big wedding. As expected, Shangguan Wan looked at Chu Luiwei angrily for a long time. In the end, she swallowed the rest of her words. Since that's the case, this princess won't beat around the bush with you. This princess wants your divine beast's blood and the dancing lotus. Imperial Father is seriously ill and only by relying on these can he hope to wake up. Imperial Father is the Son of Heaven. This is what you should do and it's also your honor. Of course, this princess won't let you give these things away for free. As long as you hand them over, this princess will immediately announce it to the world and give you a generous reward. If anyone else heard this, they would find it extremely laughable. The divine beast's blood and the dancing lotus. These 2 items were priceless treasures that were rarely seen in the world. Shangguan Wan's so-called generous reward was simply a joke in front of these 2 things. However, Chu Luiwei didn't directly refuse when she heard this. Instead, there was a slight change in her expression. Third princess, if you want me to hand over these things to treat His Majesty's illness, I naturally have no objections. However, I have a request. Shangguan Wan looked at her suspiciously. What request? Chu Luiwei said word by word. I want to personally visit His Majesty and give these things to His Majesty to consume. Impossible. Shangguan Wan didn't even think before rejecting. How could Clear Wind Palace be a place where Chu Luiwei could enter? Chu Luiwei smiled, but there was a trace of coldness in the corners of her eyes. This is originally mine. I want to see it used properly. It doesn't seem to be an excessive request, right? I am a celestial physician. Furthermore, if third princess doesn't trust me, then let another celestial physician do it. I'll just watch from the side. I only have this one request. If third princess doesn't agree, then there's no need for us to continue discussing. After saying this, Chu Luiwei stood up and dusted her clothes as if she was about to leave. Wait. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 854. This consort will agree to your request. Shangguan Wan could only agree in the end after much consideration. Chu Luiwei was extremely arrogant now that she had such a precious treasure in her hands. She would let her be smug for now. Once this matter was over, she would settle the old and new grudges together. Chu Luiwei smiled. Third princess, wouldn't it have been fine if you had agreed earlier? After all, His Majesty's health is more important. Don't you think so? Shangguan Wan choked. She only felt that the Chu Luiwei in front of her was truly an eyesore. Her expression was cold as she lowered her voice. You'd best behave yourself. Otherwise, this consort has plenty of ways to deal with you. Chu Luiwei shrugged nonchalantly as she chuckled. Shangguan Wan then walked out first. Chani hurriedly bowed as she secretly glanced at the 2 of them. The anger on the third princess's face had yet to dissipate, while Chu Luiwei had a relaxed expression. It seemed like the conversation hadn't gone very smoothly. Go invite Swimming Shi over. Shangguan Wan ordered coldly. Chani didn't dare to ask any more questions and immediately sent someone to do so. Shangguan Wan turned to look at Chu Luiwei. You, Come with this consort to Clear Wind Hall. This wasn't the first time Chu Luiyue had entered the palace after her rebirth, but it was her first time coming to Clear Wind Hall. She had tried to come here before, but this place was heavily guarded and wasn't easy to approach, so she didn't act rashly. It could be seen that Shangguan placed great importance on Clear Wind Hall. Chu Luiyue knew very well that this definitely wasn't just because Imperial Father was here. She wanted Imperial Father to properly recuperate. There had to be some other reason for this place to be so heavily guarded that even the other members of the Imperial family found it difficult to enter. When the people of Clear Wind Hall saw that Shangguan had actually brought Chu Luiyue along, they were all shocked. When they heard that Shangguan wanted to let Chu Luiyue into the room to visit His Majesty, many people were even more shocked. It should be noted that on normal days, apart from the 3 celestial physicians on duty, only the 3rd princess and eldest young master Jianghu could freely enter this place. Chu Luiyue was actually allowed to enter, which was really shocking. However, when everyone thought about it, Chu Luiyue had a divine beast and a dancing lotus. It seemed to make sense for the 3rd princess to invite her. Shangguan did not directly take Chu Luiyue in. Instead, she waited in the pavilion next to them, waiting for Zhuo Mingxi to come. All sorts of gazes landed on Chu Luiyue. However, Chu Luiyue was already used to this and did not take it to heart at all. From the beginning to the end, he always had a demure and gentle appearance. Her words and actions were completely like that of a noble lady carefully nurtured by an aristocratic family. She was very generous and appropriate. It was very different from the aggressive appearance he had in the Huayang Palace. Vaguely, one could also hear the discussions of the servants. So that's Chu Luiyue. I've always heard of her, but today is the first time I've seen her. She really lives up to her reputation. Her charm and appearance are truly stunning. Coupled with her top-notch talent, it's really enviable. I heard that she came from an ordinary background, but now that she has contracted a divine beast and has such strength, the problem of her background is no longer a problem. Moreover, this imposing manner of hers really doesn't look like she came from a small family, especially that noble air between her eyebrows. Shangguan was also gritting her teeth as she watched from the side. The few times they had met before, Chu Luiyue was still very restrained. However, after returning from the mystic forest, it seemed that because he had something on her, he had become more and more unbridled. And now, in front of everyone, she had pretended to be a different person. It was really disgusting. Chu Luiyue didn't care about Shangguan's furious and jealous gaze. The main reason she came here today was to take a look at her father first. Even though Qi Han previously said that her father's health had improved a lot, she still felt uneasy without seeing it with her own eyes. Thinking of how her father had been imprisoned in Qingfeng Palace for 2 years and couldn't even get out of bed, Chu Luiyue's heart ached. Just like that, about an hour later, Zhuo Mingxi hurried over. There was actually another person who came with him. Jianghu. Your humble servant is late. I hope that Your Highness the 3rd Princess will forgive me. Zhuo Mingxi took a few steps forward and immediately bowed. Shangguan didn't have much reaction when she saw him, but when she saw Jianghu, she knitted her brows. Yuqing, why are you here? Jianghu explained, Zhuo Mingxi and I were in a similar situation. Previously, Officer Zhuo and I happened to be together. When we heard the news from the palace, we were worried, so we decided to come together. Then, his gaze turned slightly, and it landed on Chu Luiyue. In actual fact, he originally didn't want to come, but after hearing from the palace servants that Shangguan had invited Chu Luiyue into the palace, he hesitated for a while and still followed. Ever since he hurriedly parted with her at the Lantern Festival that night, he hadn't seen her for the past few days. However, the scene from that day couldn't be erased from his mind. The more he thought about it, the more he wanted to see her again. Once this thought was born, it couldn't be erased. In addition, everyone in Xiling knew about the recent news of Chu Luiyue's legendary fiend bringing back the dancing lotus. Thus, the thought in his heart became even stronger. Chu Luiyue seemed to not notice his gaze as he bent his knees and bowed. Greetings, eldest young master, Officer Zhuo. The girl in front of him had skin as white as snow, and her eyes were bright. She didn't wear any makeup, but she was still beautiful and moving. Jiang Yuqing's heart tingled slightly. At the side, Shang Guanwan felt that something was amiss. The way Jiang Yuqing looked at Chu Luiyue made her very uncomfortable. For some reason, she suddenly remembered the painting that Jiang Yuqing hurriedly put away in the study that day. Uneasiness suddenly surged in her heart. Shall we go in and take a look at His Majesty's situation first? Chu Luiyue broke the silence. Jiang Yuqing smiled and his voice was gentle. Alarm bells rang in Shang Guanwan's heart. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from AI Network. Chapter 855. A woman's intuition was always very accurate. Jiang Yuqing only said a few words to Chu Luiyue, but it already made Shang Guanwan feel very uncomfortable. His tone was clearly different from when he spoke to her. Even his eyes seemed to have a trace of imperceptible gentleness. Shang Guanwan bit her lip. Could it be that Jiang Yuqing really had feelings for Chu Luiyue? She clenched her hands in her sleeves and took a step forward. Her eyes were filled with anger. Tomorrow is the day of our wedding. According to the rules, we can't meet on the day before. Otherwise, it would be inauspicious. Even if you're worried about Imperial Father, this consort is still in the palace. How can you come and go so casually? Did he not trust her, or did he not care about their marriage at all? Jiang Yuqing frowned when he heard this. You're thinking too much. How am I thinking too much? Shang Guanwan felt even angrier. Even if it's an ordinary person who enters into a marriage contract, they would try to avoid it the day before, let alone us. This was a tradition that had been passed down from the Tianling dynasty. Even if it was just for a good intention, Jiang Yuqing shouldn't have come to the palace at this time. Jiang Yuqing felt that Shang Guanwan was being unreasonable. It was just a meeting. What was the big deal? If he could live a good life, he would naturally live a good life. If he couldn't live a good life, it was useless no matter how much he trembled in fear and followed the rules of etiquette. Seeing that Shang Guanwan was becoming more and more aggressive, Jiang Yuqing's patience gradually ran out, and his expression turned cold. Since you value this rule so much, I'll leave now. After saying this, he really turned around and left with a wave of his sleeves. Jiang Yuqing, stop right there. Shang Guanwan didn't expect that Jiang Yuqing wouldn't give her any face. She only said a few words to express her dissatisfaction, but he actually turned around and left. And in front of so many people. In the past, even if he was unhappy, he would never treat her like this. However, Jiang Yuqing turned a deaf ear to this voice. He didn't even pause in his footsteps as he directly left. Anyone could see the decisiveness and coldness in his back as he left. Shang Guanwan's heart felt like it was on fire for a moment, but it also felt like ice water was poured on it for another moment. She was so angry that her whole body trembled. Wasn't she doing this for their future? In the end, he treated her like this. The atmosphere in the courtyard instantly dropped to the freezing point. The surrounding palace servants all lowered their heads, not daring to breathe loudly. The day before the wedding, the third princess and the eldest young master Jiang had an argument in the Qingfeng Palace, and they parted on bad terms. If this news were to spread, who knew what the people outside would say? Shang Guanwan gradually came back to her senses. Her face was red and white, and she was extremely embarrassed. Zhou Mingxi looked embarrassed and didn't know what to do. Jiang Yuqing came here with him. He didn't expect things to turn out like this. Chu Luiyue calmly stood to the side with her eyebrows slightly raised. It seemed like she didn't care about this matter at all. She knew best what kind of person Jiang Yuqing was. In his heart, the most important person was always himself. When would such a selfish person care about other people? Shang Guanwan should still like him. Otherwise, she wouldn't care so much about the meeting on the eve of the wedding. Unfortunately, Jiang Yuqing was too lazy to deal with her. Chu Luiyue lowered her eyes and sneered in her heart. Now that things had turned out like this, who knew what kind of wonderful show would happen tomorrow? Shang Guanwan clenched her teeth and suppressed the anger in her heart with great difficulty. You too, come with this consort to visit Imperial Father. After saying this, she took the lead and walked inside. Chu Luiyue and Zhou Mingxi followed closely behind. Inside the Qingfeng Palace, It was very quiet. White mist lingered above the incense cauldron and a faint fragrance of ambergris spread out. Chu Luiwei wrinkled her nose. At that time, Jian Fengqi had this smell on his body. She calmly looked inside. There was a person lying inside the golden muslin canopy. From here, she could only see a blurry figure. But Chu Luiwei could still recognize at a glance. That person was Imperial Father. The tip of her nose turned sour and the rims of her eyes turned hot. In an instant, it was as if there was a surge of heat in her heart, almost overturning her. Back then, when she was forced into a dead end, she finally chose to commit suicide without properly saying goodbye to Imperial Father. Now that they met again, she had already become a different person. When she thought of how he had been lying here for 2 years, the bitterness and anger in Chu Luiwei's heart almost burst out of her chest. She used a great deal of strength to restrain her urge to rush forward. Shang Guanwan walked in front and had already reached the bedside. Lord Zhuo, come and take a look at Imperial Father's condition first. Zhuo Mingxi walked forward. He lifted a corner of the muslin canopy and pulled His Majesty's hand out, leaving only his wrist exposed. Then, he carefully took His Majesty's pulse. After a moment, he let go of His Majesty's hand. His Majesty's body hasn't fully recovered yet and is still unstable. If you want His Majesty to wake up, I'm afraid that he still needs to be nursed back to health. As he spoke, he glanced at Chu Luiwei. If we can supplement it with the dancing lotus and the blood of mythical beasts, it would naturally be best. Everyone could guess why Shang Guanwan had asked Chu Luiwei to come over today. Therefore, Zhuo Mingxi simply said it directly. Shang Guanwan asked, "Then, Lord Zhuo, are you confident that you can refine the pill for Imperial Father today?" Zhuo Mingxi chuckled. "Your Highness may not know, but heavenly treasures like the blood of mythical beasts and the dancing lotus don't actually need to be refined into pills. You just need to boil some medicinal herbs together to make a decoction and take it directly. This will save you some time." Shang Guanwan heaved a sigh of relief and looked at Chu Luiwei. "Young Miss Chu, please take the things out." Chu Luiwei took a few steps forward and stood still 3 steps in front of the bed. From here, she could vaguely make out the outline of that familiar face. At this moment, he seemed to be lying on the bed with his eyes tightly shut, as if he was unconscious. She said, "It's my honor to be able to use these things in exchange for His Majesty's health." Shang Guanwan frowned. For some reason, she felt that Chu Luiwei seemed to have some feelings for Imperial Father. She couldn't put her finger on it, but she felt that it was an eyesore. Perhaps it was because Imperial Father could achieve meteoric success with this merit after he regained consciousness? When she thought of this, Shang Guanwan felt some disdain in her heart. Chu Luiwei took out a rectangular wooden box. Shang Guanwan and Zhuo Mingxi's eyes lit up. Then, Chu Luiwei opened the wooden box. A dancing lotus was lying quietly in the middle of it. 5 translucent pink and white petals were naturally closed. The stem was emerald green and full of vitality. It looked like it had just been plucked. Shang Guanwan's throat was a little dry, and greed flashed in her eyes. This was the real dancing lotus. Chu Luiwei snapped her fingers, and dumpling appeared on her shoulder. Shang Guanwan looked up and saw the red-tailed phoenix intimately rubbing Chu Luiwei's cheek, looking obedient and lovable. She hated it in her heart. All the good things had become Chu Lui's. Chu Luiwei seemed to be unaware and tapped Dumpling's head. "Tuanzi, can I borrow a drop of blood from you?" Love Network provided a better reading experience. Chapter 856. Dumpling nodded. Then, she gently pricked her other paw with her claws, and a drop of dark red blood immediately gushed out. Then, the drop of blood slowly floated up. Chu Luiwei reached out her hand, and the drop of blood quietly floated in the center of her palm. Upon closer inspection, it was faintly suffused with a layer of colorful light. A vast and mighty aura emanated from it. This was the divine beast blood of the red-tailed red phoenix. Shang Guanwan and Zhuo Mingxi both looked at the 2 items in Chu Luiwei's hands with shock and anticipation. This was the only one in the entire Tianling dynasty. Many people might not be able to see it with their own eyes in their entire lives. However, it had appeared before their eyes just like that. Chu Liyue's card box, Zuomingshi. Master Zua, this should be enough, right? It's enough, it's enough. Zuomingshi came back to his senses and nodded repeatedly, unable to hide his excitement. As a celestial physician, he was already extremely happy to see such a rare treasure in the world. Now that he could personally boil it into a decoction, this was an even rarer opportunity. With these, I believe that Her Majesty's health will definitely improve as soon as possible. Chu Liyue nodded in satisfaction and handed over the wooden box and the drop of blood. Zuomingshi carefully took it. For safety's sake, he took out his own medicine cauldron and began refining. A ball of orange flame burned in the medicine cauldron. Zuomingshi threw in a few medicinal herbs one after another. When the refinement was almost complete, he cautiously threw in the dancing lotus. The clear and beautiful petals quickly curled up and then slowly melted, condensing into a snow-white water droplet. At first glance, it looked like a small snowball. Finally, Zuomingshi put in Dumpling's blood. The two water droplets began to slowly merge. After about 15 minutes, all the medicinal herbs in the medicine cauldron had completely merged. Because they weren't refining pills, it didn't cause too much of a commotion. However, the ball of decoction floating in the medicine cauldron emitted a faint aura. He was not to be underestimated. Zuomingshi's body was almost drenched in sweat, and his lips were slightly pale. It could be seen that in this short period of time, he had consumed a lot of energy. Whether it was the divine beast's blood or the dancing lotus, they both contained extremely powerful energy. It was indeed not an easy task to harmonize the medicinal properties to the best possible level. In the end, Zuomingshi waved his sleeve and poured the medicine into a jade bowl. Shangguanwan stood at the side, staring at the bowl of medicinal soup, ready to make a move. If the decoction could be used on myself, not only would her strength be greatly improved, even the scars on her face might be completely healed. Thinking of this, the desire in her heart grew even stronger. Unfortunately, there was only one dancing lotus, and he had used it all just now. But the blood of a mythical beast. Wasn't Chu Liyue's red-tailed red phoenix still there? Your Highness. Zuomingshi handed over the bowl of medicinal soup. Would you please feed it to His Majesty? Shangguanwan lowered her eyes to take a look, and only then did she regain her senses. She nodded and took the bowl. Taking a step forward, she lifted the muslin curtain and sat by the bed. Chu Liyue looked up, wanting to see Imperial Father's face. Unfortunately, Shangguanwan blocked her view, so she couldn't see clearly. Her heart trembled slightly, but she still withdrew her gaze, hiding the longing and worry in her eyes. With this medicine, Imperial Father's body should be able to improve greatly. The reason why she had purposely released the news and insisted on watching with her own eyes was to ensure that Imperial Father would be safe. Now, she could finally relax a little. On the other side, after Shangguanwan fed a few mouthfuls of the medicine, she turned back to look at the two. This consort will take care of things here. You can leave first. Zuomingshi responded and was about to leave, but Chu Liyue said with a faint smile, Today, I don't have any urgent matters to attend to. Anyway, I don't have anything important to do today, so I'll just stay here and see how His Majesty is doing after taking the medicine. After all, it came from me. If I leave now and something happens in the future, I really won't be able to explain myself. Third Princess, don't you think so? Hearing this, Zuomingshi, who was just about to leave, stopped. That's right. He was the one who refined this medicine. What if something happened? Then, this humble subject will also wait here? Zuomingshi said tentatively, then stood to the side. Shangguanwan was furious. She had originally wanted to send the two of them away so that she could take the remaining half of the medicine for herself. But now, it seemed that she couldn't. Under the gazes of the two, Shangguanwan could only obediently feed the rest of the medicine to Imperial Father. Finally, she placed the empty bowl to the side and said indifferently, All right, the medicine is finished. All right, the medicine has been used up. Let Imperial Father rest first. Chu Liyue glanced at Imperial Father and vaguely saw that Imperial Father's complexion was much better. She felt slightly relieved. Since His Majesty has used the medicine, then if there's nothing else, I won't disturb you any longer. With that, she turned to leave. Wait. However, Shang Guanwan suddenly spoke up and stopped her. This consort has something to discuss with you in a bit. Without waiting for Chu Luiwei to reply, Shang Guanwan glanced at Zhuo Mingxi again. It's best if there's someone watching Imperial Father. I'll have to trouble Lord Zhuo to stay here for a while. Zhuo Mingxi hurriedly said. This humble subject will naturally do his best. Chapter 857. Shang Guanwan's heart suddenly trembled. Chu Liyue's words were like a sudden clap of thunder that exploded in her ears. She immediately felt guilty and looked at Chu Liyue in bewilderment. Was there a hidden meaning behind his words? However, Chu Liyue's eyes were curved and he didn't seem to be implying anything. Shang Guanwan's heart felt like it was suffocating and she didn't know what to do. Just tell me, are you going to give me the mythical beast's blood or not? Chu Liyue said with a smile. Third princess wants it, so how can I not give it to her? Dumpling. She turned to look at Dumpling, who was nestled on her shoulder. It had already curled up into a ball and turned its head away, looking very disgusted. Not to mention that this blood was very precious to it. Even if it didn't want it, it wouldn't be willing to give it to Shang Guanwan. Chu Liyue coaxed it a little, and Dumpling reluctantly offered up another blood bead. Shang Guanwan's eyes lit up. The blood bead hovered in the palm of her hand. Chu Liyue said, Third princess, it's not impossible for you to have it, but you have to take out something of equal value in exchange. Shang Guanwan sneered disdainfully. At the end of the day, Chu Liyue just wants something. What do you want? Chu Liyue's lips curled up slightly. I'll tell you what I want tomorrow. I hope that third princess won't be stingy when the time comes. Shang Guanwan frowned slightly. Tomorrow is my wedding day. I won't have time to deal with you then. Chu Liyue's eyes seemed to flash. That's what I need to think about. Shang Guanwan didn't care. She had a lot of things to do at the wedding tomorrow. A mere Chu Liyue wouldn't even have the right to talk to her. She had nothing to worry about. This consort agrees. Chu Liyue smiled and nodded. With a flick of his finger, the blood bead flew toward Shang Guanwan. Since that's the case, I'll first wish third princess a smooth marriage and a blissful marriage with young Master Jiang. With that, Chu Liyue did not stay any longer and turned around to leave. Shang Guanwan hurriedly grabbed the blood bead and impatiently swallowed it. In an instant, it seemed as if a flame had ignited in his chest. Shang Guanwan hurriedly took off the mask. An itchy and numb feeling came from the wound on her face. His entire body felt like it was surrounded by flames, scorching and painful. Shang Guanwan clenched her teeth tightly, forcing herself to endure this torture. As long as his appearance could be restored to normal, this was nothing. Chu Liyue left Clearwind Hall, his footsteps light. Dumpling had already returned to her body. Not bad. Chu Liyue praised in her heart. Dumpling flapped its wings with a proud look in its eyes. Chu Liyue saw its reaction and couldn't help laughing. She turned around to take a look. From here, she could only see the eaves of the hall. At this time, Shang Guanwan should be impatiently swallowing the blood of the divine beast, right? She wondered if Shang Guanwan would be satisfied with this small gift. After pausing for a moment, Chu Liyue continued to walk forward. When she passed by a junction, Chu Liyue turned and walked in another direction. The palace servant behind her hurriedly said, Young Miss Chu, you can't go there. Chu Liyue paused in her steps and then suddenly realized, look at me, I actually got the wrong direction. With that, she turned around and walked in another direction. The palace servant smiled apologetically. You haven't entered the palace many times, so it's normal that you don't know the way. It's just that in the future, you have to be more careful and don't go there casually. The news that Chu Liyue had entered the palace to offer medicine and treat His Majesty had quietly spread in the palace. Everyone guessed that if there were no accidents, this person's identity would definitely be extraordinary in the future. Thus, they scrambled to curry favor with her. Chu Liyue smiled and asked seemingly unintentionally, Oh, why is that? The palace servant looked conflicted, but in the end he lowered his voice and whispered, That's the Imperial Ancestral Hall. It was burned down 2 years ago and has just been repaired. Ordinary people can't go there. Chu Luiwen nodded as if she understood. I see. Thank you. The palace servant was flattered and repeatedly thanked her. On the way, he talked about the various rules of the palace and some gossip. Chu Luiwen listened to one by one and gradually realized that Shangguan seemed to be very concerned about the burned ancestral hall. From a certain point of view, she was even stricter than guarding His Majesty. At that time, she chose to go there. The ancestral hall should have been badly burned and no evidence was left. What was Shangguan afraid of? After leaving the palace, Jiang Yuqing went straight back to the Jiang mansion. But until now, the anger in his heart had not completely dissipated. When he thought of Shangguan's unreasonable and aggressive appearance, he felt a burst of irritation in his heart. What made him even more anxious was that when Chu Luiwen heard the two of them arguing, she was completely indifferent. She was like an outsider, calmly watching a play that had nothing to do with her. From beginning to end, she didn't look at him at all, and her expression didn't change at all. Jiang Yuqing pressed his chest. For some reason, when he thought of this, his chest felt very tight. He closed his eyes as if he had suddenly made up his mind, and said to Sun Qi, who was following behind him, "Go and ask Chu Luiwen to go to the zither room in Exenli Garden." Sun Qi was stunned. "Eldest young master, you are..." Tomorrow was the wedding with the third princess. What did eldest young master want to do by asking Chu Luiwen at this time? Moreover, it was in the zither room in Thousand View Garden. Jiang Yuqing coldly glanced at him. Sun Qi immediately said, "Your subordinate will go right away. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network." Chapter 858. Not long after Chu Luiwen walked out of the palace, she met Sun Qi, who was looking for her. "Miss Chu, my eldest young master invites you to Exenli Garden." Sun Qi's words were concise and polite. Chu Luiwen was suspicious. Why did Jiang Yuqing come to find her at this time? And to Exenli Garden? Chu Luiwen smiled. "Eldest young master Jiang should be very busy today. Why do you have time to find me? Is there an urgent matter? Shouldn't Jiang Yuqing be preparing for tomorrow's matters the day before the wedding? Could it be that the matter of the Guqin had been discovered?" Chu Luiwen quickly rejected this idea as soon as it flashed through her mind. Impossible. She did what she did that day very secretly and didn't leave any hidden dangers. Even after that, she never used the peach blossom mark on her wrist in front of anyone. Or could it be that her identity as Shimu was exposed? That didn't seem very likely. These people didn't know about the transparent hellfire in the heavenly square cauldron. Moreover, no matter which of these two situations it was, Jiang Yuqing would definitely come to settle the score with her personally. He definitely wouldn't send Sun Qi over and be very polite. This subordinate doesn't know about this either. Sun Qi lowered his head slightly. "Please do me a favor, Miss Chu." Chu Luiwen didn't want to agree at first. She felt disgusted just by looking at Jiang Yuqing, not to mention such a special invitation. Thinking about it, she felt that something was wrong. She thought for a moment and nodded in the end. Okay. Time passed slowly. After a long period of suffering, the painful and itchy feeling on Shangguan's face finally disappeared. At this time, she was drenched in sweat and looked like she was about to collapse. But after she woke up, the first thing she did was to rush to the bronze mirror next to her to look at her face. Her face was reflected in the bronze mirror. The wounds on her face that had been festering continuously before had already scabbed over. They formed a light pink scar. Although it still looked terrifying, it was much better than before. Shangguan was pleasantly surprised. She carefully touched her face. How long had it been since he had taken the divine beast's blood, and it was already so effective? If he were to use some other medicine later on, he would definitely be able to recover completely very quickly. The problem of her appearance had been tormenting her for a long time, and now she could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Ben Gong will definitely get better. Shangguan murmured in a low voice. The stubbornness in her eyes was frightening. Men! Chani, who had been waiting outside, immediately pushed open the door and entered. "What orders does your highness have?" She bowed respectfully and inadvertently raised her head to take a look. Immediately, she was pleasantly surprised. "Your highness, your face is much better now." Although Shangguan hated it when others saw her disfigured face, she was getting better. Besides, Chani was happy for her, so she didn't mind. "I still need to recuperate. Go and prepare first. Ben Gong wants to bathe and change clothes." Chani hurriedly said, "Yes. I'll go right away." Just as she was about to leave, Shangguan suddenly called out to her, her lips moving before she asked hesitantly, "What's wrong?" She pursed her lips and asked hesitantly, "Did Yuqing come back?" The smile on Chani's face instantly froze. Shangguan's heart suddenly turned cold. "Your Highness, eldest young master didn't come back." Chani lowered her head, and her voice became much softer. The room instantly fell into dead silence. Shangguan clenched her teeth, and deep resentment flashed across her eyes. In the past, the two of them rarely quarreled, but in the past few months, he had become increasingly impatient with her. Today, he even embarrassed her in front of so many people. She originally thought that he would come back to coax her, but it had been so long, and he didn't react at all. "Your Highness, eldest young master might have been busy recently, so he couldn't hold it in and said such harsh words to you." Chani saw that her expression was off and hurriedly mediated. "After all, eldest young master is also worried about his Majesty. Besides, think about it. Tomorrow is the wedding, and eldest young master definitely hopes to live happily in the future. Yet you said such things." Shangguan's mood finally eased a little. After thinking for a moment, she glanced at the sky outside. "Forget it. After I wash up, this consort will personally go find him." In the end, she still had him in her heart. She had already waited too long for tomorrow's wedding. She truly didn't want the two of them to fall out like this. At worst, she would just lower her head first. Jiang residence. It was already afternoon. Everyone in the Jiang residence had been busy the entire day, but the residence was still very lively. Everything was meticulously decorated, making it look very festive. Shangguan changed her clothes and quietly came over. Because she had often secretly gone to find Jiang Yuqing in the past, when Jiang Yuqing's people saw her coming, they would directly let her in and even help cover for her. However, when Shangguan successfully arrived at Jiang Yuqing's courtyard, she discovered that he wasn't in the residence. Calculating the time, after he left the palace, he should have returned a long time ago. Then, did he go somewhere else on the way? It's already at this time. Where else can he go? Shangguan was unhappy that she missed him. Just as she was planning to wait here, she suddenly remembered that Jiang Yuqing had hurriedly hidden a painting in the study that day. This was an opportunity for him to go and find out more. Hence, Shangguan planned to go to the study to take a look. But when she walked to the door, she was stopped by a few guards on duty. "Your Highness, eldest young master has instructed that nobody can casually enter the study without his permission. Why don't you rest in the room at the side first?" Upon hearing this, Shangguan chuckled. "I'm getting married to Yuqing tomorrow. Can it be that I can't even enter this study?" The guards looked at each other in dismay. They were also in a difficult position. Both parties were in a stalemate for a while before the few of them finally chose to let her in. After all, if Shangguan's status was higher, they couldn't afford to offend her even more. Previously, she had directly entered the study a few times, so it shouldn't be a problem. Shangguan then entered the study as she wished. Even though she didn't know everything here very well, she was rather familiar with it as she had been here quite a few times in the past. There were many books and paintings in the room, and most of them were extremely valuable. But perhaps because he had quite a few good items, Jiang Yuqing didn't really care about these. There were many valuable items casually placed on the table and bookshelf. Shangguan was even more confused. According to Jiang Yuqing's judgment, what kind of painting could make him treasure it so much? She followed the scene she saw that day and walked to the side of the table. After searching for a while, she finally found the checkpoint and opened the secret compartment at the bottom. There was a wooden box lying quietly in the middle. "Mobile users, please browse and read." A better reading experience comes from Yuan. Chapter 859. Shengguanwan's heart suddenly sped up and thumped loudly. She looked around vigilantly before carefully taking out the wooden box. Even Jiang Yuqing didn't know that Shengguanwan had already figured out some of the mechanisms in his study. However, she had never done such a thing before. She knew that once Jiang Yuqing found out, he would definitely fly into a rage. But this time, she was really too curious. Shengguanwan carefully looked at the wooden box in her hand. This wooden box was made of agarwood and exuded a faint fragrance. The paint was smooth and the patterns were exquisite. It was very exquisite and luxurious. For some reason, the lock on the box wasn't stuck. Shengguanwan thought that it was probably because he was in too much of a hurry to keep this thing that day and forgot to lock it. She held her breath and opened the wooden box. There was indeed a scroll of painting hidden inside. Shengguanwan didn't know why, but she was so nervous that her palms were sweating. She had a premonition in her heart that Jiang Yuqing's secret might really be hidden in this scroll of painting. Then she took out the painting. This thing seemed to be quite old. Whether it was the scroll or the drawing paper, they all looked a little old. However, it was well preserved. It was obvious that its owner treasured it. Shengguanwan didn't blink as she slowly unrolled the scroll of painting. When she saw the content clearly, Shengguanwan's eyes suddenly widened. In the painting was a woman dressed in palace attire. She was standing by the lake. She seemed to have heard something. She turned around and smiled sweetly. She had snow-white skin, cherry lips, and bright eyes. Her attire set off her noble aura. However, this bright smile and the craftiness in her eyes made people's hearts beat faster. If she was originally as bright as the moon, cold and noble, then this smile instantly added a touch of smoke and fire. It made people feel as if they could reach out their hand and grab the moon from the sky. She was devastatingly beautiful and had a heavenly fragrance. That was probably it. However, what shocked Shengguanwan wasn't that Jiang Yuqing had collected such a woman's portrait, but that the woman in the portrait was Shengguanyu. It was the Shengguanyu who used to be so high and mighty that it seemed unreachable. But in the end, it chose to sever its desires and fall into the abyss of death. With a thud, the painting fell from Shengguanwan's hands. However, the woman in the painting was still smiling so beautifully. It was as if all the colors in the world had gathered on that one person. It was incomparable. In an instant, it was as if thunder had descended from the sky. Shengguanwan's mind went completely blank. Her hands trembled uncontrollably, and she felt as if she had fallen into an ice cave. From the inside to the outside, from the top to the bottom, it was bone-chilling. She stumbled and bumped into a chair, almost falling to the ground. "No, that's impossible. That's absolutely impossible," Shengguanwan murmured in a low voice. No one knew who she was trying to explain or who she was trying to convince. That was Shengguanyu. That was Shengguanyu. She knew that Jiang Yuqing used to like Shengguanyu, but that was all in the past, wasn't it? He was the one who had poisoned her. He was the one who had kidnapped her and sent her to the ancestral hall. He was also the one who had personally attacked Shengguanyu. He had forced her into a dead end. If he still cherished and missed Shengguanyu, why would he do that? It was precisely because of those things that Shengguanwan was convinced that Jiang Yuqing had completely lost all feelings for Shengguanyu. However, it wasn't until now that she suddenly realized that everything she thought was wrong. Shengguanwan's face was as pale as a ghost. Her eyes were lifeless, and her heart felt as if it had been twisted by someone. It was so painful that she almost suffocated. She suddenly came back to her senses and hurriedly picked up the painting. Then she bit her lip and looked at it carefully. The Shengguanyu in the painting looked a little young, as if she was only 13 or 14 years old. Shengguanwan's heart skipped a beat. She remembered now. This palace dress was indeed the one that Shengguanyu wore when she was 14 years old. She was born as an imperial concubine, so her hairpin ceremony was naturally very grand. Shengguanwan could still clearly remember that many people came to the palace that day. Everyone was laughing and praising Shengguanyu. Shengguanyu, who had just turned 15 years old, was actually just a budding young girl, but she had already attracted the admiration of countless people. Some people were born to be favored by the heavens and were the center of attention. Shang Guanyu was such an existence. Why did Jiang Yuqing have such a painting? Shang Guanwan's gaze shifted slightly and she saw the inscription at the bottom of the painting. It was a small line of words. On the 10th day of the 8th lunar month in the 31st year of Yuanzhen. My heart is filled with joy when I see her, and I yearn for her. This was personally painted by Jiang Yuqing on that day. It had been 10 years since then. Shang Guanwan stared at the line of words as if she wanted to burn a hole in it. She gripped the scroll so tightly that her knuckles turned white. If not for the last bit of rationality left in her, she would definitely tear this painting into pieces. So it turns out. For so many years, Jiang Yuqing had only liked her, Shang Guanyu, from the beginning to the end. If he didn't miss it, why would he keep such a painting so carefully? And she, Shang Guanwan, was at most a joke. For the past few years, he had given her advice, and he had been obedient to her. She had always thought that she was special to Jiang Yuqing. But now, she finally realized that she was actually worthless to Jiang Yuqing. She threw the painting on the table and covered her face with her hands. She cried and laughed at the same time, as if she had gone crazy. Just a moment ago, she was still thinking of taking the initiative to repair their relationship. Even if she took the initiative to lower her head, it didn't matter. She was willing. As long as they could reconcile, as long as the wedding tomorrow could be held smoothly, as long as everything was fine in the future, Shang Guanwan's chest seemed to be surging crazily. Then, her face turned pale and she spat out a mouthful of blood. Her aura quickly withered, and she fell into a chair. The guard outside heard the commotion and knocked on the door worriedly. He lowered his voice and asked, "Your Highness, are you all right?" Shang Guanwan's mind was in a mess. She was stunned for a moment, and her body stiffly put the painting back. Then, she got up and walked outside, asking word by word, "Now, where exactly is he?" Exanli Garden, music room. When Chu Luiyue arrived, she saw Jiang Yuqing standing by the lake. He was dressed in a green robe and stood with his hands behind his back. He looked at the lake in a daze, and no one knew what he was thinking. When he heard footsteps, he turned around. When he saw that it was Chu Luiyue, his gaze became much gentler. Chu Luiyue's eyes flickered, and she walked over. "Eldest young master, why are you looking for me?" Jiang Yuqing looked at her, and there seemed to be an undercurrent in his eyes. After a moment, he suddenly said, "I want to marry you. I want to marry you." Chapter 860. Chu Luiyue thought that she had misheard. "What?" Jiang Yuqing repeated. "I said I want to marry you." It wasn't a want or a request, but the want. He seemed to be giving an order, not discussing it with anyone. It was a matter of course and self-righteous. Chu Luiyue widened her eyes slightly as she looked at Jiang Yuqing. His expression was serious, and his eyes were clear. He didn't look like he was joking. This matter was so absurd that for a moment, Chu Luiyue thought that Jiang Yuqing had gone crazy. "Eldest young Master Jiang, do you know what you're saying?" Chu Luiyue was baffled. Was there something wrong with Jiang Yuqing's brain? The night before his wedding with Shang Guanwan, he asked her to come here and even said that he wanted to marry her. "Of course I know what I'm doing." Jiang Yuqing seemed to have expected Chu Luiyue's reaction and replied naturally. "I've thought about it a lot these 2 days and I finally made up my mind." It wasn't easy for him to make this decision. Jiang Yuqing knew better than anyone what he should and shouldn't do now. He knew that from the first time he saw Chu Luiyue's smile at the Wanzheng competition, he had already developed some feelings for her. From then on, he purposely restrained himself and wanted to get rid of the thoughts he had about Chu Luiyue. He thought that if he didn't meet or say anything, he would gradually forget about these things. But it was too difficult. In the mystic forest, she had already made him waver again when she saved him. In the end, what made him decide to do this was the meeting a few days ago. At that moment, he almost couldn't tell whether the person in front of him was Shang Guanyu or Chu Luiyue. Chu Luiyue was very similar to her, but there were many differences. He had always known this. However, after that glance, a crazy idea suddenly appeared in his mind. If you can't tell, then so be it. Whether it was Shang Guanyu or Chu Luiyue, it was fine as long as this person was standing in front of him. That person was already dead, his soul extinguished, never to return. He had once planned to bury the past and never mention it again. However, after Chu Luiyue appeared, he suddenly felt as if a certain part of his heart had been filled up. He had seen countless beauties of all shapes and sizes. But after so many years, there were only two people who could give him such a feeling. One was Shang Guanyu, and then there was Chu Luiyue. Fortunately, Chu Luiyue came from a humble background and was not as high and mighty as that person, who was as high as the clouds and as unreachable as the sun. You just have to stay by my side. I can give you whatever you want, Jiang Yuqing said seriously. This was not a mirage of an alliance, but an actual promise. Given his status, he indeed had the confidence to say such a thing. Seeing Jiang Yuqing's confident look, Chu Luiyue was so angry that she laughed. Young Master Jiang, I'm afraid you don't remember some things clearly. Let me remind you. First, you're going to marry the third princess tomorrow. If you do this, what will you do to the third princess? Second, your status will change again tomorrow. From now on, you will be the third princess's husband and her subject. I don't think I need to tell you how to write the word loyalty. Third, from the beginning to the end, you didn't seem to ask for my opinion. Isn't this a little too arbitrary? Chu Luiyue raised her chin slightly, and her red lips curved into an extremely cold smile. Also, you really can't give me what I want. It was already evening. The sun was setting in the west, and the setting sun reflected the sky into a warm orange color. The night wind of early summer still carried a trace of heat. However, Shang Guanwan, who had rushed to Exenli Garden, felt her entire body turn cold. Many scenes flashed through her mind one after another. One moment, it was the comings and goings of Jiang Yuqing and Shang Guanyu. The next moment, it was the face of despair in the Imperial Ancestral Hall. The next moment, it was the painting that had been kept for 10 years in the study. She was filled with anger, but she didn't know how to vent it. She could only crazily surge in her chest, making her feel like she was about to explode. At this moment, she only had one thought in her mind: find Jiang Yuqing and ask him clearly. When the guards of Exenli Garden saw Shang Guanwan, they were all shocked and hurriedly bowed. Greetings to the third princess. What was she doing here at this time? Where's Jiang Yuqing? Shang Guanwan asked coldly. Seeing that her expression was very ugly, the guard didn't dare to hide anything and immediately said, Eldest young master is in the zither room of Thousand View Garden. This subordinate will send someone to inform. Before he could finish his sentence, Shang Guanwan had already rushed over. Third princess. The two guards wanted to stop her, but they didn't dare to. Although Exenli Garden had always been managed by Jiang Yuqing, it was still the territory of the Tianling imperial family. If Shang Guanwan wanted to enter, who would dare to stop her? The two of them looked at each other and saw the doubt and uneasiness in each other's eyes. Could the third princess be going to find trouble with eldest young master? Could it be that she's going to make a big scene? Shang Guanwan didn't stop and kept walking forward. When she thought about how he was actually in that place right now, the hatred in her heart deepened. Of all places to go, he just had to come to the zither room. In the past, she thought that Jiang Yuqing was guarding this place strictly because she had harmed Shang Guanyu. Now that she thought about it, he probably treasured the place she had stayed in before. She hurriedly walked over and saw the sparkling surface of the lake from afar. Just as she was about to go forward, she suddenly saw two people standing by the lake. One of them was dressed in green and stood with his hands behind his back. It was Jiang Yuqing. However, the person in front of him was dressed in a red dress, with long black hair and a beautiful face. Who else could it be but Chu Luiyue? Why was she here? Shang Guanwan was stunned for a moment. She felt that there was something wrong between the two of them, so she instinctively stopped and hid her figure. At this moment, Jiang Yuqing's voice sounded. Tomorrow's wedding is between me and Shang Guanwan. You don't have to worry about whether I've let her down or not. In addition, even if she's the ruler and I'm the subject after tomorrow, it doesn't mean that I have to do everything according to her wishes. Finally, I think that marrying me will definitely bring you more benefits than disadvantages. There are countless women in the Tianling dynasty who want to cling to me, but they can't compare to you. Not you. Therefore, I only said what I said just now to you. If you insist, then I'll ask you again. I want to marry you. Are you willing? Shang Guanwan suddenly covered her mouth. Chu Luiwen narrowed her eyes and suddenly smiled. Her expression was originally cold, as if covered with a thin layer of ice, but her smile instantly bloomed like thousands of flowers. The afterglow of the setting sun shone on her snow-white face. She was beautiful and peerless, and her eyes were as bright as stars. I don't want to. She smiled. I have someone I like. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 861. Jiang Yuqing was suddenly stunned. How familiar was this scene? Once upon a time, that person was also like this. Here, she told him with a smile that her heart already belonged to someone else. The same place, the same words, the same smile. The only difference was that when that person said this to him in the past, he didn't even have time to express his feelings. But now, he put down his attitude and sincerely asked Chu Luiwe to be with him, but he was also rejected. For a moment, Jiang Yuqing almost mixed up the two scenes. He couldn't tell whether the person in front of him was Chu Luiwe or Shang Guanyu. Something suddenly surged from the bottom of his heart. He grabbed Chu Luiwe's wrist. That won't do. Chu Luiwe easily dodged. Although Jiang Yuqing's cultivation level was higher than hers, after the experience in the Red Moon Desert, her movement technique had improved too much. It wasn't difficult to deal with Jiang Yuqing. Chu Luiwe took a step back and raised her eyebrows slightly. The smile on her face faded a little. Eldest young Master Jiang, please conduct yourself with dignity. The disgust and disdain that flashed through her eyes suddenly pierced Jiang Yuqing's heart like a steel needle. The resentment that had been suppressed for many years suddenly gushed out. It almost went to Jiang Yuqing's head. He almost blurted out angrily, I won't allow it. You can't like anyone else except me. Jiang Yuqing's sudden outburst surprised Chu Luiwe. In her impression, Jiang Yuqing rarely became so angry no matter what the situation was. Even when he was harming people, his expression was always calm and collected. Why did it seem like he had been provoked? Chu Luiwe became vigilant and took another step back. She frowned and said coldly, liking someone can't be forced. Jiang Yuqing, wake up. Jiang Yuqing's heart trembled for some reason when he saw her getting angry. He looked at the pair of black jade-like eyes that were filled with anger, and his expression changed. He opened his mouth, but his voice lowered again. You, don't be angry. He murmured in a low voice as if he was begging her. He reached out his hand to pull her again. Chu Luiwe felt that Jiang Yuqing was really crazy. What was he doing? You, who was he calling? A deep sense of disgust arose in her heart, and she turned around to leave. However, at this moment, a voice filled with anger and resentment came from the side. Jiang Yuqing. Chu Luiwe looked up. What a coincidence, the person who came was Shang Guanwan. Just now, when she was arguing with Jiang Yuqing, she didn't notice that someone had come. From the looks of it, she must have heard a lot of things just now, right? However, no matter how much she heard, Jiang Yuqing's every word was like a sharp knife to her, ruthlessly stabbing into her heart. This sharp roar finally brought Jiang Yuqing back to his senses. He looked at his empty hand. Chu Luiwe stood to the side, far away from him. Her entire body was filled with disgust for him, as if looking at him any longer would dirty her eyes. He suddenly felt a sharp pain in his heart. It was like this in the past, and it was still like this now. The emotions in his eyes quickly turned cold. He looked at Shang Guanwan and asked coldly, "Why are you here?" Shang Guanwan sneered. "This consort is the third princess, and this Exenli garden is an imperial garden. Why can't this consort come here? But you, Jiang Yuqing, we're getting married tomorrow, but what are you doing? You're actually asking to marry another woman? Jiang Yuqing, do you even have a heart?" Only she knew how much her heart hurt when she heard those words just now. She thought that her heart had already become numb after seeing that portrait. However, when she came here and heard how he treated Chu Luiyue, she realized that it could be even more painful. It was as if someone had grabbed her heart, pulled it out, threw it on the ice, and ruthlessly trampled on it. Ridiculous. Ridiculous. Jiang Yucheng frowned as he looked at the hysterical Shang Guanwan. He had already sent away the nearby guards in advance. He originally wanted to have a good talk with Chu Luiyue, but he didn't expect that Shang Guanwan would barge in and make such a scene. Calm down. As a princess, what's the difference between you and a shrew if you make such a scene? Jiang Yucheng coldly reprimanded. These words completely ignited the anger in Shang Guanwan's heart. Ha! Shrew? You called me a shrew? Shang Guanwan pointed at her own nose as if she had heard the funniest joke in the world. She shrieked, Jiang Yucheng, you betrayed me first. Then she fiercely pointed at Chu Luiyue next to her. What's so good about this slut that she's worth it for you to do this? She's just a lowly thing, but you actually treated me like this for her. Chu Luiyue narrowed her eyes dangerously. However, before she could do anything, Jiang Yucheng took the lead to speak coldly. Shang Guanwan, watch your words. Don't forget your status. Shang Guanwan suddenly laughed. Her facial features were distorted, and her eyes were crazed. She slowly said, Jiang Yucheng, do you think I don't know what you like about her? Isn't it because she looks 50% similar to Shang Guanyu? Jiang Yucheng's heart thumped. His voice was stern. What nonsense are you talking about? However, Shang Guanwan turned a blind eye to his anger. Instead, she turned her head to look at Chu Luiyue with a mocking gaze. Chu Luiyue, do you think he's sincere to you? You're just a substitute. Your eyebrows and eyes are exactly the same as my short-lived elder sister, Shang Guanyu. He can't forget that person. Now that he's looking for you, you're just a substitute. Shang Guanwan. Jiang Yucheng felt that something was wrong. He quickly stepped forward, grabbed Shang Guanwan's hand, and was about to leave. Your brain is muddled. I'll take you to clear your head. Shang Guanwan flung his hand away. Don't touch me. I'm very clear-headed. Her eyes were red and she looked embarrassed. She stared at Jiang Yucheng and sneered. Finally, she whispered, Jiang Yucheng, what are you afraid of? Are you afraid that she'll find out that you're just treating her as a substitute for Shang Guanyu? Or are you afraid that people will find out that you're still obsessed with Shang Guanyu even though you're getting married to me tomorrow? Or are you most afraid that people will find out that you've liked Shang Guanyu for 10 years, but in the end, you personally slap? There was a loud slap in the face. Shang Guanwan staggered and fell to the ground. Half of her face quickly turned red and swollen, and blood seeped out of the corner of her mouth. It was obvious how hard that slap was. Jiang Yucheng looked down at her with a murderous look in his eyes. Shang Guanwan, you're crazy. Chu Luiyue stood at the side and watched this scene with a cold expression. It was as if she was watching a show that had nothing to do with her. Looking at the two hysterical people who were at each other's throats, she suddenly curled her lips and looked at them coldly. How laughable. The scene from 2 years ago was happening again. But this time, everyone's identities were reversed. The pain that they had inflicted on her in the past was slowly being exacted back on them. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 862. She hadn't done anything yet, but the two of them were already fighting among themselves. It was finally their turn to experience the bone-piercing pain of betrayal that she had experienced back then. Chu Luiyue tucked the loose strands of hair on her cheeks behind her ears, looking like she was ready to watch a good show. If it were anyone else, they would definitely want to leave immediately after seeing this scene. After all, the two people who were fighting were the Honorable Third Princess and Jiang Yucheng, who had the power to overturn the imperial court. Anyone who had anything to do with these two people would probably get into trouble. The more they knew, the more dangerous it would be. Chu Luiyue was different. These two were her old enemies. She couldn't be happier to see them causing such a ruckus. What was there to be afraid of? The ones who should be afraid were these two people. Jiang Yucheng's slap made Shang Guanwan see stars before her eyes, and a strong smell of blood instantly surged up between her lips and teeth. But this time, she finally regained some of her rationality. Chu Luiwei was still standing next to them. If she really revealed everything just now, the consequences would be unimaginable. Shang Guanwan covered her face. Her heart was filled with lingering fear, and her eyes were filled with regret. Jiang Yuqing looked down at her condescendingly. In his heart, he really wanted to kill her. Shang Guanwan had always been impulsive, reckless, arrogant, and willful. In the past 2 years, her temper had become worse and worse. He had been enduring it all this time, but he didn't expect her to be brainless to this extent. If he hadn't stopped her in time, would she have loudly told everyone what they had done? Although Jiang Yuqing liked Chu Luiwei, he had never thought of telling her these things. Such a confidential matter involved many people. If they weren't careful, they would die. However, Shang Guanwan almost revealed everything. Guards! Jiang Yuqing ordered. 2 people immediately came out from the shadows and knelt on one knee. Greetings, young master. The 3rd princess is delirious for a moment and needs to rest in bed. Prepare a carriage immediately and accompany me to send the 3rd princess back to the palace. Yes. The 2 guards didn't dare to say anything and just followed Jiang Yuqing's instructions. Shang Guanwan wanted to say something, but Jiang Yuqing grabbed her wrist and pulled her up from the ground. She was a little scared and stepped back to hide. The look in Jiang Yuqing's eyes just now was too frightening. Moreover, when she thought about how Jiang Yuqing had been infatuated with Shang Guanyu for 10 years and still couldn't forget her, she felt as if she had swallowed a fly. She felt extremely nauseous. Jiang Yuqing tightened his grip on her hand that was trying to break free. He gave her a warning look, but his tone was much gentler. You seem to be sick. I'll take you back to the palace to have a good rest. Shang Guanwan was both disgusted and afraid. Her wrist hurt from his grip, but she didn't dare to be presumptuous and didn't dare to say a word. Jiang Yuqing was satisfied and turned to look at Chu Luiwei. I've let you see a joke. Just pretend that today's matter never happened. He didn't want to kill Chu Luiwei. Besides, Chu Luiwei now had a mythological beast and a dancing lotus. His status was different from before and couldn't be easily touched. Chu Luiwei nodded in understanding. He didn't say anything else and directly left without looking sideways. He didn't even look back after walking far away. When Chu Luiwei's figure finally disappeared, Jiang Yuqing looked coldly at Shang Guanwan. What do you know? His voice was cold and merciless, as if he was interrogating a prisoner. Shang Guanwan shivered and turned her head away. I don't know anything. Jiang Yuqing squeezed her wrist, and her bones creaked. Shang Guanwan was in so much pain that her face turned pale. Speak. It hurts. It hurts. I'll tell you. Shang Guanwan finally couldn't take it anymore. She braced herself and shouted, I went to your study. Jiang Yuqing instantly understood, and his expression became extremely dangerous. You touched my painting? Shang Guanwan had never heard him speak to her in such a tone. She felt wronged and resentful, but there was also a deep fear in her heart. Tears flowed down her cheeks. I did touch it. I saw your painting. So what? Jiang Yuqing, from the beginning to the end, you only loved Shang Guanyu. You admired her for 10 years, but what did you do to me? Jiang Yuqing looked at her expressionlessly. There's no point in saying all this. For the sake of tomorrow's wedding, I'll let you go this time. But don't let me know that you did such a thing again. I'll send you back later. Prepare well. Don't make any mistakes tomorrow. As for everything that happened today, you'd better never mention it again. Shang Guanwan smiled bitterly. Jiang Yuqing, what am I in your eyes? But if you really treat her so well, why did you ask me to deal with her? Don't forget, you were the one who forced her into a dead end. Jiang Yuqing suddenly leaned closer, pinched her chin, and said word by word, I did those things. You don't have to remind me over and over again. If you must have an answer, then I'll tell you, I've never compared you to her. I can kill her and I can kill you even more, understand? After saying that, he shook Shang Guanwan's face away. Shang Guanwan lowered her head, and the hatred in her heart kept surging. But in the end she still said, I understand. Tomorrow's wedding. Everything will go according to your plan. Tianling Dynasty, 41st year of Yuanzhen, June 6. Third Princess Shangguan and the eldest son of Grand Tutor Jiang Lizhua, Jiang Yuqing, were getting married. Digression. At 6:00. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from AI. Net. Chapter 863. The third princess's wedding and coronation ceremony was naturally a joyous occasion for the entire nation. The entire Xiling city had been bustling with activity since 3 days ago. On the 6th day of the 6th month, everyone's enthusiasm reached its peak. On the streets, red satin fluttered, and almost every household hung red lanterns for celebration. Ever since the crown princess passed away 2 years ago, the huge Xiling city had never celebrated so wildly. Countless people flooded the streets, and there were cheers and laughter everywhere. Everyone's faces were filled with excitement and anticipation. They wanted to see what kind of grand wedding it was, and at the same time, share in the joyous atmosphere. The streets leading from the Jiang mansion to the imperial palace had long been divided into 2 groups of black cavalry, each guarding strictly. The red brocade spread out for miles. Golden auspicious clouds were embroidered on it, and under the morning sun, it shone brightly, luxurious, and imposing. Ordinary princesses' weddings were not qualified to use such a spectacle. But today, Shangguan was going to ascend to the throne as the empress. As the empress, she naturally could afford to use these. In front of the Jiang mansion, 108 strings of firecrackers sounded in succession. Fireworks flew in the air, and a thick layer of fireworks covered the ground inside and outside the Jiang mansion. A snow-kicking black-headed foal appeared in front of the Jiang mansion. This was an 8th-grade demonic beast, with a strong body and strong limbs. Its entire body was pure black, and only its 4 hooves were snow-white, as if it was flying through the snow. Its fur was without a trace of impurities, and its eyes were blue-green, as clear and clean as turquoise stones. Amidst countless people's anticipation, Jiang Yuqing finally walked out at 9 a.m. Today, he wore a red brocade robe, and his hair was tied up with a white jade crown. He was originally a famous handsome man in Xiling City, and today's attire made him look tall and slender, with sword-like eyebrows and starry eyes, very handsome. Therefore, when he came out, it immediately attracted a series of low exclamations from the crowd. Many women looked at him with bright eyes and blushed cheeks, their faces full of unconcealable adoration. Whether it was background, appearance, or talent, Jiang Yuqing was definitely the best. Such a person, only the imperial princess is worthy of such a person. A low murmur of discussion came from the crowd. I don't think it's that good to have a marriage alliance with the royal family. Especially when he was with the third princess, he was even less free. First, it's the etiquette between a ruler and his minister, and then the way of husband and wife. That may be the case, but from today onwards, the status of the entire Jiang family will rise by a level. Even eldest young Master Jiang himself will have more say in the imperial court. There are many people in the world who want such a good thing. Exactly. Previously, he already had a lot of power in his hands, but he didn't have a suitable identity. As time passed, it was inevitable that people would criticize him. But as long as he marries the third princess, won't all of this be natural? Isn't it all because the empress concubine suddenly passed away back then? There were many things that could only be urgently handed over to him to handle. In the end, after he took over, he was unwilling to return it. He endured until now and continued to do so. In the future, no one will be able to stop him from doing whatever he wants. Shoo, keep it down. Are you tired of living? If such words were heard, they wouldn't have a good ending. Fortunately, the streets were crowded and very noisy at this time. Apart from the people nearby, no one else could hear such discussions. Jiang Yuqing walked to the front of the snow-kicking black-headed colt, leaped, and easily mounted the horse. Behind him, the ceremonial team had already finished their preparations. They carried mahogany chests filled with all kinds of treasures and lined them up one after another. There was almost no end in sight. Apart from the Jianghu residents that prepared the betrothal gifts, no one could guess how rich the items inside were. Jiang Yuqing lightly kicked the horse's belly, and it immediately moved forward. Gongs and drums were beating on the streets, and ceremonial music sounded. Jiang Yuqing led his people towards the imperial palace. The crowd surged along with him. From afar, the array was astonishing. Because today's wedding ceremony was a little special and was held in the Langquan Palace in the imperial palace, all the important figures of the Tianling dynasty directly entered the palace and waited for Jiang Yuqing's arrival. Jiang Yuqing sat high on the horse. When he raised his head, he could see the heavy and majestic imperial palace. His expression was calm, and an undercurrent flashed through his eyes. He had imagined such a scene many times. In the end, after so many years, it finally came true. But standing at the end of this palace road, waiting for him behind the door, was already another person. But that was not important. What he had to do was to cross that door. As for who the person behind the door was, it was not important. On the other hand, the palace had been preparing since before dawn. The process of the ceremony was complicated and tedious, and there were many things to be used. Chani checked with the people sent by the Ministry of Rites over and over again, afraid that she would miss something. In the main hall of Huayang Palace, Shangguan also woke up early and began to let 2 experienced nannies help her dress and make up. Of course, she had already put on a mask in advance. Although the wounds on her face had improved a lot and were no longer festering, scabs of different depths still formed because of the scabs. If she wanted to completely remove them, it would probably take another month or so. Moreover, half of her cheek was red and swollen from Jiang Yuqing's slap, and it had yet to fade. The 2 nannies were both old people in the palace. They had once sent several princesses to their weddings and were very experienced. But when they came to Huayang Palace to help Shangguan dress and make up, the 2 of them simultaneously became nervous. Shangguan was still going to ascend to the throne today. They had served several princesses before, but this was the first time they had served someone of this status and standard. Everyone knew that everything at the ceremony had to be done carefully and cautiously. There could not be the slightest mistake. In the 1,000-year history of the Tianling dynasty, there had been empresses before, but there were not many. Originally, they had all thought that the crown princess would inherit the throne this time. They did not expect that something would happen later, and Her Majesty would fall into a coma. After going around in circles, this position actually fell into the hands of this previously unremarkable 3rd princess, Shangguan. In addition, the 2 of them quickly discovered another problem. Shangguan did not seem to be in a very good mood. She sat there expressionlessly, and the cold aura around her almost froze the entire space in the room. This was strange. Today was her big day. It was her wedding and her ascension to the throne. It was already extremely difficult for the world to ask for one of them, let alone her having both. From today onwards, she was the most honorable person in the entire Tianling dynasty. From now on, millions of miles of territory belonged to her. What else could she be unhappy about? Let's not talk about this. Just Jiang Yuqing alone is the dream man of millions of women. Which woman in the world did not envy her? But they definitely did not dare to ask such a question. The 2 nannies helped Shangguan dress and change into the phoenix coronet and robes with trembling hands. After everything was done, Chan Yi's voice finally came from outside. The prince consort has entered the palace. A better reading experience came from the Love Network. Chapter 864. Upon hearing this, Shangguan's face, which had been as cold as ice, finally showed a trace of emotion. It was finally here. Your Highness, the prince consort is very handsome today. The palace maid who came to report the news said happily. However, the main hall was still silent after she finished speaking. Shangguan said calmly, I understand. This consort understands. You may leave. The palace maid was stunned. What was going on? Why did the third princess not seem happy at all after hearing this news? If it was an ordinary woman, shouldn't she be shy and happy when she heard that her husband was coming to marry her? But why did the third princess's expression seem as if she didn't care at all? The palace maid had wanted to say a few nice words to ask for a reward, but she ended up in such a situation. For a moment, she was at a loss and didn't know whether to advance or retreat. What are you still standing there for? Do what you should be doing. If there is even the slightest oversight, you will be held accountable. Chan Yi, who was waiting at the door, reprimanded in a low voice with a cold expression. The palace maid was startled and hurriedly agreed in a submissive manner. Please. With that, she retreated timidly. When she walked outside, she was still confused. Strange. The third princess and the prince consort had always been very loving. There was no reason for them to be like this on the wedding day. Could it be that the third princess was unhappy because she praised the prince consort? That was still possible. Thinking of this, the palace maid secretly scolded herself for being stupid. In the main hall, Shangguan Wan looked at her reflection in the bronze mirror. Her injuries had been completely covered, and her exquisite makeup made her look even more beautiful than usual. Disregarding everything else, Shangguan Wan was also one of the top beauties in Xiling City. Today, she was dressed up splendidly, which made her even more beautiful. However, her eyes, which carried a trace of resentment, ruined the beauty of her face. She looked a little bitter and unkind. When a nanny saw this, she smiled and said fawningly, "The third princess's eyes are really beautiful. The third princess is truly as beautiful as a painting. She's like a fairy. After so many years, this servant has served many masters, but you are really the most beautiful one." The other nanny also hurriedly echoed. "But if the prince consort sees you, he will definitely be shocked." Shangguan Wan sneered in her heart. She slowly stroked the phoenix hairpin on her head and asked softly, "What's the matter?" Then how is this consort compared to eldest sister? Shangguan Wan's elder sister was naturally only one person, the former princess, Shangguan Yu. As soon as this was said, the two old maids were instantly stunned and embarrassed. Shangguan Wan was indeed beautiful, but compared to that person, she was still a far cry. Not to mention his facial features, just his aura was different from the rest. Shangguan Wan was a worldly beauty, but the empress concubine's beauty was like the sun in the clouds, causing people to only admire her. Even if they looked at her more, they would feel that it was blasphemous. There was really no way to compare. One of the nannies reacted quickly and smiled. "Today is His Highness' big day, so you are naturally the most beautiful." Shangguan Wan didn't say anything, but her eyes were filled with sarcasm. She didn't need them to say anything. She also knew that her appearance couldn't compare to Shangguan Yu. In that painting, Shangguan Yu was only 14 years old, but she was already a rare beauty. It was no wonder that Jiang Yuqing had been thinking about her for 10 years. At this moment, the sound of ceremonial music suddenly came from outside. Everyone knew that it was the bridegroom's arrival. When the palace maid who had been reprimanded saw this, she hurriedly took 2 steps back and said excitedly, "Your Highness." After the prince consort entered the palace, he immediately dismounted and couldn't wait to marry your highness. Actually, there was still some distance between the palace gates and Huayang Palace Hall. She said this to highlight Jiang Yuqing's love for Shangguan Wan. As expected, even the 2 old maids echoed her words. "It seems that the prince consort is deeply in love with your highness. He can't wait to welcome you back." Shangguan Wan sneered in her heart when she heard this. Deeply in love? If they knew that Jiang Yuqing had fiercely slapped her yesterday, personally escorted her back, and even warned her for a long time, who knew if they would still be able to say such words? Shangguan Wan lifted her wrist and covered her head with the red veil. The dragon and phoenix embroidered veil fell down, covering her eyes that were filled with mockery. Chan Yi walked over and helped her out of Huayang Palace Hall. Jiang Yuqing had already arrived outside the hall with his men. Under the gazes of countless people, Jiang Yuqing walked up and stood in front of Shangguan Wan, extending his hand. He said with a gentle expression, "I've come to marry you." On the other side, everyone had already gathered in the plaza in front of Lang Kuan Palace Hall. This huge plaza was paved with white marble. At this moment, the officials of the imperial court were standing on the left side, while the important people of the various sects were standing on the right side. Apart from that, there were also black cavalry soldiers guarding in all directions. There was still a red carpet in the middle, and it extended all the way up, crossing the 9 steps and reaching the entrance of Lang Kuan Palace Hall. The reason why the wedding was held here and the coronation ceremony was because the Tianling scepter was enshrined in Lang Kuan Palace Hall. Everyone knew that this was the symbol of the Tianling Emperor's authority. To the people standing here, the wedding wasn't the highlight of the day. They were more concerned about whether Shangguan Wan could successfully walk up the 9 steps, enter Lang Kuan Palace Hall, and pick up the Tianling scepter. The steps that went up were engraved with dragon patterns, which were majestic and dignified. Standing here, one seemed to be able to faintly feel the suppressive aura it contained. If this place was already like this, then the power of the Tianling scepter in Lang Kuan Palace Hall was naturally even more unimaginable. As expected of a grand ceremony, this lineup is really grand. The people from Dragon Teeth Mountain and Chongshu Pavilion stood next to each other, so Mu Hongyu ran over to Chu Luiyue and the rest. Seeing this, she couldn't help but speak softly. Yu Ran blinked and said, "What's this? Hongyu, you haven't seen anything more powerful." Mu Hongyu was a little surprised. More powerful? This was Shangguan Wan's wedding and coronation ceremony. It was extremely grand. Logically speaking, this should be the highest standard. How could there be anything more powerful than this? Back then, Yi Ran paused and looked around carefully. Then she lowered her voice and said, "Back then, when the Empress came of age, it was even grander than this. Later, when the Empress toured the borders, there was also the imperial court. Which one of them wasn't more powerful than this?" Mu Hongyu widened her eyes in shock. That Empress is really so powerful? Even the ceremony for her coming of age was even grander than this. How powerful must she be? Of course, after all, the 3rd princess is only a princess. How can she be compared to the Empress? Chu Luiyue listened from the side and smiled, but she didn't say anything. At this moment, a melodious horn sounded. The 3rd princess has arrived. The prince consort has arrived. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from the Love Network. Chapter 865. A voice full of energy rang out and instantly spread throughout the entire Lang Kuan Palace. Everyone in the square in front of the palace heard the voice and looked over. They saw 2 people coming in hand from the magnificent palace gate. The person on the left was Jianghu. He was wearing a red robe today, and his collar and cuffs were embroidered with dark dragon patterns. There was a green jade belt around his waist that was as wide as a finger joint. At first glance, he was really handsome. Disregarding everything else, just her appearance alone was top-notch. Our prince consort is really outstanding and elegant. No wonder the 3rd princess is so in love with him and wants to marry him no matter what. Hey, don't you think about it? That Jiang Yuqing was someone who caught the eye of the Empress. Naturally, ordinary people can't be compared to him. That's true. Even if you look at the whole West Hill, among the younger generation, he can be considered the top in all aspects, right? Everyone was discussing animatedly. However, at this moment, a somewhat abrupt voice suddenly came from the crowd. He's just a vile person who's trying to make his own camp. No matter how good his skin is, it's still unbearably ugly. The person who spoke didn't deliberately lower his voice, and the strength of the people present wasn't weak, so almost everyone heard it clearly. The originally noisy crowd suddenly quieted down, and everyone looked in the direction of the voice. They wanted to see who was so bold to dare to say such words at this time and place. Chu Luiyue heard this and slightly raised his eyes, then was slightly startled. The person who spoke was a middle-aged man. He was tall and very burly, and his skin was dark. He stood there like a small mountain that could move. However, what attracted attention wasn't his appearance, but the black armor he was wearing. There was a long sword at his waist. He was clearly a general. In the entire Tianling dynasty, there were very few people who could openly carry a sword into the palace. Of course, the most important thing was that he was standing in front of the officials, showing his high status. When they saw that it was this man who spoke, some people who originally wanted to watch the show quickly withdrew their gazes. TSK, they actually forgot about this killing god. He was the commander of the Black Cavalry, Meng Jingji. Speaking of this person, he was extremely famous. Almost everyone in the Tianling dynasty, regardless of their age, knew that this valiant general had been stationed at Xinjiang for decades and had made outstanding military achievements. Although he did not return to the West Hill often, his name was still enough to intimidate people. If it wasn't for the fact that the third princess wanted to ascend the throne, he wouldn't have rushed back. Now that Jiang Yuqing was in control of the court and held great power, the only person who dared to publicly insult him like this was probably Meng Jingji, who held military power. General Meng, what do you mean? Jiang Lizhua was the Grand Tutor, one of the three dukes. He also stood in front of the officials, only a few steps away from Meng Jingji. When he heard this, his expression immediately turned ugly. Meng Jingji sneered. Not only did he not back down in the slightest, he continued to speak. What? Did I say something wrong? If he still had any feelings for the Empress concubine, why would he do such a thing? Why did he have to be with the third princess of all people? Thinking of how the Empress concubine had treated him and the third princess, it had not even been 3 years since she passed away, and the two of them were so impatient to get married. How ridiculous! If it was in Xinjiang, anyone who dared to do such a thing would definitely have their head chopped off by Man Huangzi. He was originally a military general who had been on the battlefield all year round. His whole body carried a strong murderous aura, which was extremely cold. In addition, he really couldn't stand this matter, so his tone was even more fierce and imposing. Even the few officials standing behind him unconsciously took 2 steps back, afraid that they would be implicated. Jiang Lizhua didn't expect him to speak so bluntly and harshly. For a moment, his face turned pale with anger. Meng Jingji, you're impudent. You're humiliating the third princess. Yuan Wei, who was next to him, calmly stepped forward and stood between the two of them. He smiled with a gentle expression and said, Okay, they'll be here soon. How ugly would it be if you make a big fuss at this time? Calm down. Jiang Yuqing was so angry that his hands were trembling. It was clearly Meng Jingji who started it first. After he finished scolding, he was satisfied. But he didn't let anyone refute him? Those words just now were clearly heard by all the people in the surroundings. Meng Jingji looked at him condescendingly. Hey, this matter was done by them. This general was just telling the truth. How did it become a humiliation? It seems that Jiang Lizhua also knows how ugly this matter is if it gets out. Meng Jingji, don't be so rampant. Jiang Lizhua was so angry that he wanted to immediately go forward and beat Meng Jingji up. But Meng Jingji was one of the top experts of the Tianling dynasty. If he went forward, he would only be asking for trouble. On the side, Yuan Wei stopped him while giving Meng Jingji a meaningful glance. General Meng, in the end, it's His Highness's big day. Please don't say too much. Just treat it as giving me face. Meng Jingji finally stopped talking. Countless gazes looked over, and Jiang Lizhua only felt his face burning. He held it in for a long time and finally spat out a sentence with great difficulty. If you have the guts, then say these words in front of the third princess. This old man wants to see how arrogant you can be after today. This is the way of the ruler and minister, do you understand? Meng Jingji disagreed and smiled coldly. This general has always been loyal to Tianling. Ruler? Not to mention that His Majesty was still alive. Even if he had passed away, it was still unknown whether third Princess Shangguan could raise the Tianling scepter. At this point, this small farce had finally subsided. However, the reactions of the surrounding people were different. Some were envious, some were happy, some were disdainful, and some were mocking. Although Meng Jingji was a bit suspicious of having an army for his own sake, what he said just now wasn't completely unreasonable. Jiang Yuqing was previously engaged to the Empress concubine, and it was even time to hold the wedding. He didn't expect that something would happen to the Empress concubine, and everything would change. Until now, it had actually been less than 2 years since the Empress concubine's death. Jiang Yuqing and Shangguan Wan's wedding really made people feel that it was inappropriate. However, not many people dared to say this. Now that Meng Jingji had caused a ruckus, the atmosphere immediately became very awkward. The surrounding space seemed to have become a bit colder, as if it was frozen. Chu Luiwei glanced at Meng Jingji, her heart filled with mixed feelings. Because she never thought that Meng Jingji would actually speak up for her. In her impression, she had only seen Meng Jingji a few times, and he always had a dark face and looked very fierce. In addition, she had supported Mu Qinghe to be the deputy general of the Black Cavalry, so to a certain extent, she had divided up Meng Jingji's power. She had always thought that Meng Jingji didn't have a good impression of her. She didn't expect that. The newcomer has arrived. Give your first greeting. Ascend the steps of the 9th heaven. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 866. At this moment, Jiang Yuqing and Shangguan Wan had already walked over hand in hand and stood in the middle of the square in front of the hall. All the discussions had dissipated at this moment. Countless gazes were focused on the two of them. Shangguan Wan was also dressed splendidly today. Her bright red phoenix tail trailed behind her. With every step she took, the golden threads buried in the cloud brocade material sparkled. Even though she was still covered with a veil and no one could see her appearance, just by looking at her attire, they could tell that she was very luxurious. Next, the two of them would walk up the 9 steps together and formally bow in front of Langkuan Hall. Logically speaking, since His Majesty was still alive, he should be waiting for the two of them in front of the door. However, because he was still unconscious, this step was omitted. Jiang Yuqing and Shangguan Wan held hands tightly and stood side by side, looking like a perfect couple. "Wanger, let's go." Jiang Yuqing tilted his head slightly with a smile on his face. His voice was also very gentle. It was as if the woman beside him was the love of his life. Shangguan Wan nodded lightly. No one could see her expression at this moment. The two of them walked forward hand in hand. Shangguan Wan took the lead and stepped onto the first step. Jiang Yuqing deliberately fell back half a step to show his respect. No one could find fault with his every word and action. Shangguan Wan continued to walk up and stepped onto the second step. At this point, one could already feel the faint pressure spreading from the Langkuan Palace. However, this was nothing to Shangguan Wan and Jiang Yuqing. The two of them walked up step by step, and the pressure on their bodies also became heavier and heavier. Every time they walked up a step, they needed to mobilize more force to resist this increasingly stronger force. When they reached the 7th step, Shangguan Wan felt a little powerless. Although she was now at the early stage of the 7th rank, she had just recovered her Yuan meridian after all, and the strength she could display was not that strong. His entire body felt like it was filled with lead, incomparably heavy. Jiang Yuqing, who was by the side, quickly noticed that something was amiss with Shangguan Wan. During this period of time, he relied on some methods to barely recover his strength to the peak of the 7th stage. Although it was a little better than Shangguan Wan, the pressure in the Langkuan Palace was not to be underestimated. He secretly exerted more strength in his hand and sent Shangguan Wan to the 8th step. Shangguan Wan's legs trembled and her body swayed. Jiang Yuqing frowned inwardly and quickly supported her. Then, he gritted his teeth and climbed to the 8th step. Standing here, he could clearly see that the door of Langkuan Hall was open. Usually, the door to Langkuan Palace was tightly locked. Only during the coronation ceremony would the elders of the royal family work together to open it. Once this barrier was opened, the pressure of the Tianling scepter spread unstoppably in all directions. It was precisely because of this that Shangguan Wan and Jiang Yuqing encountered such a terrifying pressure. The closer they got, the more shocking the aura was. The people standing in the square below were also staring intently. When they saw that Shangguan footsteps seemed to be a little shaky, some people's expressions changed slightly. Did the third princess lose her footing just now? An extremely low voice came from the crowd. She was wearing a phoenix coronet and a robe with a wide skirt behind her. However, many people still saw her swaying just now. It shouldn't be, right? If she can't go up now, how can she raise the Tianling scepter? Someone retorted, but his tone was very uncertain. In the history of the Tianling dynasty, there were precedents of people who couldn't raise the Tianling scepter. After careful calculation, there were a total of 4 people. The final outcome of these people, without exception, was that they were all deprived of the right to inherit the imperial power and never had the chance to start over again. To them, this was an undeniable shame and humiliation. Even though they could retain their status as members of the imperial family and eat, wear, and use the same things as before, because of this failure, they would never be able to raise their heads again for the rest of their lives. Among the 4 people, 2 of them couldn't bear the pressure after the failure and chose to commit suicide. Another one was greedy for cultivation and ultimately suffered from qi deviation, severing his own yuan meridian and dying. As for the last person, he never took a step out of the palace again and died in less than 3 years. It was obvious how important the matter of raising the Tianling scepter was to the heir to the throne. It was also because of this that every emperor would be especially careful when selecting their heirs. Most of them would be evaluated from a very young age based on their talents. They would first select a few with good conditions and focus on nurturing them. When they grew up, they would then select the best one. However, Shangguan was never the one who was chosen and thought highly of. On one hand, it was because her birth mother's status was low and she wasn't valued since she was young. On the other hand, she had never displayed any amazing talents and was even more invisible. Most importantly, ever since Shangguan was born and found to have the Tianjing Yuan meridian, the current emperor had directly selected her and never thought of a second person. The Tianjing Yuan meridian that only appeared once in 1,000 years was extremely precious. It was actually very normal for the emperor to do this. However, no one would have thought that something would happen to her on the eve of her wedding. In the 2 years that followed, Jianghu and Shangguan joined forces and gradually took control of the court. Other than Shangguan, there was really no one more suitable than her. The countless gazes behind her made Shangguan feel as if there was a blade on her back. She knew that at this time, any small mistake would be infinitely magnified. She clenched her teeth and crazily circulated the force in her body. She tried to raise her leg and climb up the last step. However, it was as if there was a heavy weight on her legs and she couldn't move at all. She began to feel anxious. Her heart was burning with anxiety. If she couldn't even go up here, then wouldn't the back? At this moment, Jianghu injected a force into her body from her palm. Shangguan instantly felt much more relaxed and hurriedly raised her leg and took this step. Jianghu followed closely behind. The 2 of them held their hands tightly and, one in front and one behind, finally climbed up the last step. Stepping on the ground, Shangguan finally heaved a sigh of relief in her heart. In front of the Langquan Hall, 6 royal elders lined up in a row and respectfully waited for the 2 of them to arrive. Actually, there should have been 8 of them. Unfortunately, Elder Qiushi and Elder Duanmu Chun had both died in De Huang Swamp previously, so there were only 6 people left now. The elder standing at the side took a step forward and concentrated his qi in his dantian. His voice was like a large bell that spread far and wide. First bow to the heavenly Tao. Shangguan and Jianghu turned around and bowed to heaven and earth. Second bow to the heavenly order. The 2 of them turned around again and bowed to the Langquan Hall. The celestial emperors bowed to each other. The 2 of them stood facing each other. In an instant, Shangguan's mind went blank. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from the Love Network. Chapter 867. She had been waiting for this day for far too long. She had thought that they would finally get married, but in reality, the man in front of her had never liked her in the slightest. The music of the ceremony drifted over. At this moment, she was the center of attention, high and mighty. She had thought that she would be elated on this day. But when it really came to this moment, she suddenly felt empty. Thinking of that painting, her hands couldn't help but tremble, and endless hatred surged in her heart. Jianghu was about to bend down, but he saw that Shangguan didn't seem to have any intention of moving. A trace of coldness flashed across his eyes, but it disappeared in an instant. Then, he gently and softly called out to her. Wang. There was a smile on his face, and his voice was very gentle, as if he was afraid of disturbing something. But the look in his eyes was so cold. At this moment, Shangguan couldn't see his face clearly, and could only see a faint outline. But when she heard his voice, Shangguan's heart trembled unconsciously, and she felt a little scared. The fierce and cold way he treated her yesterday was still clearly engraved in her mind. She suppressed the emotions in her heart, closed her eyes, and finally bowed down for the last time. Seeing that she was obedient, Jianghu felt a lot more at ease, and almost bowed to her at the same time. The old man cheered. The ceremony is over. The crowd immediately cheered and celebrated. Firecrackers and fireworks were set off. The huge square was extraordinarily lively. But all of this sounded incomparably ironic to Shangguan's ears. Every word of celebration, every blessing at this moment, seemed to have become a curse to her. What love, what sincerity, what deep love between husband and wife. It was all a joke. She had waited so long for this day, and worked so hard for so long, but in the end, she had married a man who had never cared about her. And this man had even proposed to another woman the day before their wedding. It was only because that woman was somewhat similar to the Shangguan he had studied for 10 years. We're finally together. A doting smile appeared on Jianghu's handsome face. He walked forward and lifted Shangguan's veil. Today, Shangguan wore exquisite makeup and a phoenix hairpin in her hair, looking luxurious and beautiful. Standing next to Jianghu, they were a perfect match. The third princess and the prince consort are truly a match made in heaven. Whether it's family background, appearance, or anything else, there's really nothing more compatible than this. The crowd was in an uproar. It was as if everyone was overjoyed. Is this considered a success? Mu Hongyu glanced at it and couldn't help but frown. She moved closer to Chu Luiyue and whispered, Luyu, don't you think the two of them are weird? What was strange about it? That's right. Oh, I don't know what to say. Anyway, I just feel that the two of them don't seem very happy. Although they're standing together, they seem to be a little distant from each other. In short, it's a little strange. They don't seem to be a good match. It wasn't that she hadn't seen people get married before. Although the occasion wasn't so grand, most of the people who got married were very affectionate. Just by looking at each other without saying anything, one could tell that they were really in love. However, Shangguan and Jianghu didn't feel that way. Chu Luiyue smiled slightly. How are they not a good match? I think they're a match made in heaven. Seeing the two of them standing on the steps and bowing to get married, she felt a burst of joy in her heart. Fortunately, she didn't marry Jianghu back then. Otherwise, she would be disgusted for the rest of her life. Such a man was the best match for Shangguan. On the stage, Shangguan was also smiling. The two of them seemed to be very happy, but only they knew what they were thinking at the moment. Jianghu reached out and held Shangguan's hand. Shangguan felt cold all over and only felt disgusted in her heart. However, she didn't dare to forcefully break free and could only smile again. The two of them were equally matched in acting. For a moment, they confused many people who didn't know the inside story. In the eyes of most people, everything was going smoothly. The two of them standing on the steps were also harmonious and beautiful. At this moment, the old man who was singing the ceremony opened his mouth again. Please, Tianling Scepter. This voice was full of energy and echoed in the sky above Lang Kuan Palace for a long time. It was transmitted clearly to everyone's ears. Everyone's spirits were lifted. Immediately, they focused their attention and looked over. The remaining 5 elders of the imperial family nodded and turned to enter Lang Kuan Palace. Countless eyes were focused on the door, eager and excited. They all knew that what was about to happen next was the real grand finale. Buzz! A deafening roar suddenly came from the Lang Kuan Palace. Many people were shocked and hurriedly used their force to set up a barrier in front of them. Swoosh! The elder who was singing the ceremony waved his sleeve and set up a silver barrier at the bottom of the steps, blocking this terrifying fluctuation. At this moment, the 5 elders finally walked out of Lang Kuan Palace. A huge square black crystal was moved out by the few of them. Then it sat on the ground. Bang! A muffled sound. Almost even the ground trembled fiercely. That black crystal was half the height of a person, and on top of it, there was a scepter floating quietly. The lustrous glow shrouded it, and its appearance couldn't be seen clearly, but its power was shocking. Although a barrier had been set up in front of them, the people in the palace still found it difficult to breathe. However, at this moment, they couldn't care less. Everyone's eyes fell on that place. That was the symbol of the imperial power of the Tianling Empire, Tianling scepter. The old man who was singing the ceremony knelt on one knee. Third princess, please use the scepter. Digression, 6 points, the great way of the magic doctor, when/gray cutie Meng, 1v1 refreshing when without abuse. She went against the heavens to prove the devil's path. He cut through all obstacles just to protect her. He said, "You want the world, I want you." Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Immortal Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.